Welcome, everybody, to the Ultimate Health Model podcast, where we take a deep dive into uncharted waters on everything health. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our audience for listening. They have a lot of options. I think there's a million podcasts out there. So we really do appreciate our listeners. And also, with my ultimate health model that I created, we are looking for testimonials. Anyone that's been helped by my model that I created in my book, please go to our website at Ultimate Health Model and tell us your story and your experience on how this has helped you. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Suneel Dhand. He went to medical school in Cardiff, England. That's where he started, right, medical school, and came across the pond here to a residency at Franklin Square Hospital in Baltimore. And I think he's still there now. We can talk about that. And anyway, without further, he wrote a couple of books, one called High Percentage Wellness Steps about 10 years ago, which is really good. I read that. And I think he wrote another book too as well, and had some articles. And he's all over social media. Very, very popular doctor here. So, Dr. Dhand, why don't you go ahead and tell us, our audience, our friends listening, about yourself and how you got started in all this journey and all that stuff.
Well, hello, Ben. It's an honor to join you and your audience. I know we are going to have a fruitful discussion, so much going on. You introduced it a lot there. So as you can probably tell by the way I speak, I didn't grow up on this side of the pond. Grew up in the UK, just outside London, went to medical school in Cardiff University. Then after that, I came over to the United States, did my residency in Baltimore at the hospital you mentioned. And since then, I've worked up and down the East Coast, mainly in the Northeast. I hold a number of state licenses. I did do a stint down in Florida. And very much what I learned early after residency was how much we were seeing as a result of metabolic dysfunction. And that's when I started writing, blogging more. Thank you for reading my book. Over 10 years ago, I would change a lot that was in that book, because not only has the metabolic health situation changed, but also my belief system in terms of what I trust and what I don't trust from authorities. We can talk about that. And then the pandemic hit, boom, and I saw the what I call the clown world nature of our medical establishment and many of the recommendations. And then I was promoting my message of common sense on social media. Things kind of took off. And that leads me to where I am now, where I still focus on really getting the correct message to people, a real message, which is unfiltered by conflicts of interest, and getting back to more honesty and transparency, but above all else, which is where our passions align, trying to make our population healthier, because unfortunately, adults and children alike are being absolutely pummeled with metabolic disease. And I don't believe catastrophe is a strong enough word for where we are. So we have a lot of work, and that's why people like us are out there trying to get people healthier and feeling well.
Yeah, and I want to start with this statement you had, I think, in one of your videos. It's a strong statement, and it's something that people listening are gonna go, wow. So you said babies are being born with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This, to me, is atrocious. And if they're saying it's genetic, that is absolutely ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. And so isn't anyone taking notice of this? I mean, babies being born with these problems or a high blood pressure, something is wrong.
Something is very wrong. And I cannot stress enough to everybody who's listening right now that we are in uncharted territory. Humanity has never known anything like this. We've dealt with malnutrition, we've dealt with starving, which I would argue, if somebody's undernourished, is better than being overnourished in terms of what it does to the body. But right now in the United States, we have mothers with extreme metabolic dysfunction because of obesity, because of diabetes giving birth. This has never happened before. And there is evidence that, yes, children are now being born with metabolic disease. And even if they aren't born with metabolic disease, within only a few years, I mean, think about this. I don't know if you have children, but how resilient children are, and their bodies are so adaptable and they have such fast metabolisms. What it takes to make a 3-year-old obese is horrific, absolutely horrific. And I can't believe that this is not more of an issue. I mean, we had the vice presidential debate last night, not a word about this. The presidential debates, this, as far as I'm concerned, is the number one issue facing the United States. And the chickens are going to come home to roost within a few years, because all of these youngsters, we have 50% of adolescents now who are overweight or obese, have raging insulin resistance. They're all going to get diabetes in their 20s and 30s. And if we think the situation is bad now, just wait 10 or 20 years. And we're going to reach a reckoning.
Absolutely.
It's horrible. It's atrocious. And I can't believe that more doctors are not waking up in a cold sweat every night at what's going on. I mean, did you go into the profession because you want people to be well? Do you care about people's health? How are you okay with this? I get you're very passionate about this, as you can tell.
Absolutely. And so do I. And what's really hard for me to understand is that we have different eating styles. I eat meat, a little bit veggies. You're a vegetarian. You eat plants, but plants and whole foods and meat and eggs and dairy, those are all natural foods that were put here on Earth. Skittles were not.
Exactly.
Bread was not. Why is this so hard for people to understand? And I think part of the problem, and we can go into that right now because I have a lot of notes, but part of the problem, and what I realized when I wrote my book, that studies, and you've discussed this in your videos, are completely absurd, flawed, inaccurate. It doesn't matter if it's a carnivore study. It doesn't matter if it's a vegetarian study. It doesn't matter what kind of study it is, because you can't control for all factors. And when I realized, and I was writing for my book, that a lot of studies are epidemiological and what's called observational studies. And when I realized how those were done, Suneel, I was like, this is absurd. I was pissed. I was like, you're telling me they give someone a questionnaire, ask them what they ate, and ask them what they ate last, in January of this year, on January 27th, what did you eat? I don't know. Is this absurd? And so they use that as a study, and they compilate all these results and say red meat causes, problems and chronic disease. They say it causes diabetes. They say this is ridiculous. How are not more people frustrated, or not frustrated, infuriated by how these studies are done and the validity of them?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, evidence-based medicine is a joke. It really is. When you actually look into it, especially in me being a doctor, this is something that took me a few years to realize. You realize that it's all riddled with conflicts of interest. They are not done correctly. Journals nowadays will only publish articles which follow a prescribed narrative. And we have simply forgotten common sense. I like to come back a lot to the original principles of Hippocrates, the father of medicine, 2,500 years ago. He wrote everything down in terms of the basic core fundamentals: eat a real diet, exercise, etc. This is not rocket science. And as you've alluded to, we've got different eating styles. Everybody has different eating styles. Nobody I work or coach with, they like the same things. You have to modify things, but the basic principles are always the same. Whether you're a vegetarian, vegan, carnivore, a mix, pescatarian, whatever, basic principles are the same. Eat real food, optimize protein intake, minimize carbohydrates and sugars, don't eat too much. I mean, of course, it's going to be a calorie issue as well if you're trying to lose weight. All of these core fundamentals, you cannot get around it. It's physiology, it's science. And it shouldn't take a genius to realize that you cannot pummel your body with this artificial fake food. It's not even food. We should start thinking about them as what they are. You walk into any gas station or any convenience store. What part of the country are you in, by the way?
I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay
Okay, so
Area,
you're on the other side.
California.
I'm in the
Yeah.
Northeast, but I'm sure it's
Yeah.
the same. We supposedly live in healthier states, and my state is supposed to have one of the lowest obesity rates. So I shudder to think what the worst ones are like, because obesity is rampant where I am. Metabolic dysfunction is rampant, and it's because everything comes back to a unifying factor. When you have a population where 75 to 80% of calorie intake is this processed, fake, industrially produced product, this is what's going to happen. And we completely forget this. And all of these studies that they commission, it's all nonsense. Frequently, they're funded by food companies. Our universities are funded by food companies. And to get back to another point, a lot of these people who like to promote these studies, who like to form an agenda, they like to think they're all about equality and diversity and bringing people up. But actually, the communities they hurt the most are the ones they claim to care about, because it's the minority communities who are devastated the most. It's their babies that are being born with metabolic dysfunction. It's not the affluent babies, it's the poor ones. And this is why it's even more of an atrocious thing, because you have this mass genocide going on. And I don't use the word lightly because it is. When you have entire families with 3 to 10-year-olds walking around with metabolic dysfunction, and nobody's saying anything. It's taken as normal. But it all comes back to the fact that we've forgotten what a proper human diet is.
Well, yeah. And what also people don't understand, and I read about this in my book, is it's way more than diet. And you touch it on in your videos, in your book, High Percentage Wellness Steps, that sleep, exercise, stress, the EMFs in the air, all the toxins in the food and the water and the soil, all that, what that does for our friends listening. Let me explain this. And I'm pretty sure Suneel will agree with me. What this does is it causes chronic inflammation, chronic oxidative cellular stress. What does that mean exactly, too? Well, a lot of people don't understand is what this does is it causes chronic dehydration. And there's some really good books out there. I suggest our friends listening might want to purchase by this Dr. Batman Geldy. I don't want to say his name, but he says like Water Cure. And basically, when I read his books, it answered all of my questions. And what do I mean by that? Because all these things cause chronic dehydration. And then the body goes into survival mode. It goes into partitioning mode for water. Like it'll put water in certain organs and it'll take it out of your skin because it's not as important. It's constantly trying to manage water. So all the things that me and Suneel are talking about, it's not that sugar is bad. It's not that stress is bad. It causes chronic dehydration. That's the root problem of all these things that I don't think most people understand. But the inflammation and the stress causes that chronic dehydration. And the factor that causes that's the food that we're talking about, the toxins and all that. So that's the circle that people really need to understand to help to understand their health issues.
Yeah, yeah. And as you said at the beginning, that it's a holistic approach. That's what I teach. I do think that diet will always be the number one fundamental, because think about it, every cell in your body and every thought that you have is powered by what you eat. So that's always going to be the majority, but there's so much else that comes into it: a clean environment, exercising, working on stress, working on sleep, working on your life goals. Of course, it's a holistic approach if you're talking about bringing somebody's metabolic health up. But as you mentioned there, the unifying factor, now when I see somebody who's overweight or obese, it's not a cosmetic issue. I look at it as a doctor, and I look at it firstly, if they're young, it's a tragedy because their body is being destroyed. And what greater gift from God, or whether you believe, whatever you believe in, if you believe in nature, there's no greater gift than your body. It's a perfectly functioning system, and we're destroying it. And I view that as a tragedy. So when I see somebody who's overweight and obese, not only cosmetic, but imagine their cells, what's going on, their mitochondria are under stress. There's oxidative, the process is known as oxidative stress, which is associated with inflammation. Then you have insulin resistance, which ultimately leads to type 2 diabetes. You get little fat micro deposits where they shouldn't be. And you have this whole gamut of metabolic dysfunction. That's what it all comes down to. And then you can even link this to accelerated aging. Why do you think the second group of people that got affected during the pandemic were obese people after the elderly? It's because being obese has essentially accelerated aging and decreased immunity.
And all these things, what they do, they increase or they suppress the immune system. And so what Suneel's saying, obviously, is, yeah, that's correct. So the elderly have a compromised immune system. The overweight people, obese people have a compromised immune system. That's going to make it a lot harder for your body to fight off whatever infection it might be. And so I think going back to what we said in the beginning of this segment, it's a holistic approach. Yeah, food and diet is definitely, I don't believe that's the most important, but they're all important. And when people understand, like you're saying, and you as a holistic doctor are explaining the whole puzzle to people, their sleep, their exercise, the food, the toxins, people can kind of shake their, oh, okay, they have a better idea of how to help themselves in other ways as well. And I think that's super. Yeah, I think that's super important.
It is, and we shouldn't forget the mental health side of this as well, because we have a spiritual crisis in modern mainstream culture, and it's a vicious circle. People get stressed; they're not around the right messages, and then they get into bad habits. Because remember, each one of us is simply a collection of habits and behaviors. That's all we are. And the great thing about this is, and the empowering message is, anybody can change their habits very quickly. This is a big topic that I work on with people, that once you get into the right habits, achieving any goal, health goal, is very doable. But you have to get back to core fundamental basics. And the answer definitely is not. This is why the modern medical establishment is so sinister. They're pushing, as you've alluded to, the idea that this is genetic, that the answer is an injection every week. I mean, how ludicrous to think that you start injecting toddlers with something for the rest of their life to help them, as opposed to solving the upstream issue, the root cause, which is a really bad food environment and bad messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people need to question things. Like I wrote a sentence right here. Well, there are a couple things that were really interesting. Your video with Dana White, and that clip, I loved it. He said that this is exactly what we're saying. If I broke my bone, if I have an infection, I'll go to the doctor. But for anything else, absolutely not. And I thought that was really telling about the state of our medical community. It's sad. It's embarrassing. All these things you're saying, and you need to, for our friends listening, just use your head and think. And if the doctor says something, go research it. Go look it up. Go say, hey, does this make sense? Should I try this? What should I do here? I know people are busy. I'm busy. You're busy. We're all busy. But do some research. Think about things. Ask people and use your common sense that you've been giving and see, does this make sense to do this or not?
Exactly.
But what the doctor's telling me.
Yeah.
Do I take this drug for the rest of my life? And so I think that it's just super important to pay attention to your own body.
It is, absolutely. And I'm a member of the medical profession. I have some close friends who are doctors. I don't think the vast majority of doctors go out there wanting to hurt people. But at some stage, you have to open your eyes to what's going on. I think right now, the medical profession is completely captured. Doctors don't use critical thinking. I've talked about this a lot. And we're getting to the stage where, yeah, the medical profession can be frequently very dangerous, especially when they are completely aligned with an industry like the pharmaceutical industry, which has proven itself time and again to be utterly fraudulent. Bad things can happen. So I would urge everybody out there, hopefully you have a doctor you can trust, but no matter who your doctor is, as you said, do your own research. If something is telling you that, or you're feeling that something isn't quite right, then look into it, get a second opinion. And ultimately, you know your own body, but understand that doctors are following protocol these days. There's very little common sense. There's enormous conflicts of interest at the top. And I feel the same as Dana White. I don't trust doctors. I would never go to a doctor for anything generally health or well-being related. If I break my arm or need emergent surgery, that's one thing I think we're good at, is treating acute conditions. That's what I do when I'm in the hospital. Obviously, if somebody comes in with overwhelming infection or they're in heart failure, you need to fix that. Nobody's going to say you solve that with a supplement. But other things, be very careful out there. Understand that the medical profession is captured. It's not what it was 30 or 40 years ago. We all have the memory of the doctor coming to our house and visiting us and our parents with their little doctor bag. It's not like that anymore. It's complete corporate capture.
Absolutely. And I wrote a couple sentences here, what I thought was really important. So, doctors knowing nothing about nutrition. This is a little kind of analogy I wrote. Doctors know nothing about nutrition is like a chef knowing nothing about cooking.
Yeah.
I mean, or an electrician not knowing about electricity. I mean, to think that they get no training in nutrition, and to think there's people like you, but didn't anyone like in medical school question like, okay, we're learning all this stuff about what drugs to do and use and this and that. No one really thought, hey, are you telling me that apple or that piece of steak might have a some kind of impact on my health?
Yeah.
Nobody asked this question.
It's astonishing. I mean, right now we have gastroenterologists who tell their patients with inflammatory bowel disease that it doesn't matter what they eat. You have oncologists who tell their cancer patients who are newly diagnosed and a decent chance of survival, don't worry about what you eat. Yeah, you can eat tons of sugar if you want. There is complete cluelessness. And unfortunately, if you go to doctor conferences, you will find very quickly that many doctors are completely out of shape themselves and have no idea what to eat. So how could they possibly lead on this issue? They don't know it themselves. They've never been taught it. And they simply don't understand. They can't see it. I mean, I see it every day. And I often wonder to myself, what am I doing here? I am throwing medicines and injections at people who are just pouring toxic junk into themselves on the other side. I mean, what is the point? Let me tell you something else, Ben. If you got type 2 diabetes 100 years ago, when it was very rare, you would have had a much better chance of beating it because doctors were very honest then. They would say, hold on, you eat terribly. You must immediately cut back on your carbs and sugars and you'll reverse it. Go and lose some weight. Now it's all about, oh, no, that's okay. We'll just throw more pills at you. The medical profession is completely lost in this area. And yeah, I like your term. I use the word ashamed, but embarrassing is a good term as well. It's embarrassing to be a member of my profession at this time in history.
Wow. Yeah. And what you said about the diabetes part 100 years ago, think about it for our friends listening. Think about this. Just close your eyes and think about this. 100 years ago, there was very little diabetes. 100 years ago, there was zero cases of Alzheimer's. I'm not sure. I think the first one's in 1912. I'm not sure the years exactly. How, or heart disease, or whatever there was, if all this exploded in the last 100 years, 120 years, let's say, how could that be genetic? I mean, just use one brain cell, people. Think about it. Doesn't it? There has to be another cause. And what nobody's talking about, which I think is really problematic, is all the electromagnetic frequencies. And that is something we got to do something about, because we can't have eating processed food, sugar, horrible diet, toxins, and the phones. So we have to go back to, and this is my opinion, we have to go back to a way of eating naturally,
Yeah.
meats, vegetables, because the phones, you can't have both. The higher the technology goes, as far as I'm concerned, and the more advanced it gets, we have 4G now, 5G. It's causing massive inflammation because it's
Wouldn't surprise
unnatural
me. Yeah. Yeah.
it's not unnatural frequencies.
Everywhere. Wi-Fi, wherever we sit, we've got Wi-Fi
Yeah,
around. Yeah. Yeah. I would
it's
totally like to
everywhere.
see this. I think it's multifactorial here.
It
We have a
is.
bad environment. But yeah, that's absolutely something which should be looked into. That's been a big change over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and what's our friends listening might understand is there's something called the Schumann resonance. I read about this in my book. Just for comparison, that's a 7.83 hertz and frequency. Hertz are like the amount of waves that pass by in a second. So that's the frequency. And so that's kind of like a rolling thing like this, very gentle. 5G, I believe, is 5 billion times a second. I'm not sure on the exact amount, but suffice it to say, it's magnitudes higher than with the Schumann resonance. So just think about what's going on. These waves are going bam, 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 and they're hitting you so hard, and it just puts a lot of stress on the mitochondria, the cells, and whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's definitely going to be studied in the future, and is contributing to this problem we're having, this epidemic of chronic disease.
Yep, we are living in an artificial environment, and the general rule is the further you get away from nature, the more problems you're going to get. We can think we're as advanced as we like, but we are still basic animals, and we forget that. And actually, this it's a good point here, because you raised the issue of 100 years ago or so, we didn't have a lot of these problems. A lot of the pushback against that is people saying, well, people didn't live as long 100 years ago, but there were huge other variables there. There was high infant mortality. We had no antibiotics. There are some good medicines out there. Obviously, antibiotics are one of them. And then you had millions of young men who used to go and die in wars. All of that was bringing the life expectancy down. But actually, if you looked at people who lived past a certain age, they actually did live very long, healthy lives until very old age. It was just getting over that, being 20 to 25, because so many people used to die so young.
Yeah. And what's important about that is that, they talk about it's life expectancy versus lifespan. And, when I was sitting writing my book, I was thinking, well, whoever created us or whatever created us, they probably put in a lot of safeguards to keep us alive and healthy. I mean, your body's not designed to break down. Your body's a miraculous machine that we know very little about. And if that's the case, maybe it's self-healing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just these common sense things, Suneel, that I can't wrap my head around that people don't think about. It's just really common sense. I
It's
mean, I don't
common
know what else to
sense. Like,
say.
look at nature. When did you last see an obese animal in nature? It won't happen. If you're obese in
Never.
nature, you will either get eaten or won't be able to hunt. It is unnatural. It, that's not insulting people. It's the truth. It's an unnatural state to be obese and be so inflamed. It's not compatible with nature if you were in nature, because it's so unhealthy.
Yeah, and that's once again, that's just simple logic. If you're a obese animal, you're not going to make it. And so let's talk about a little about what's allowed here and what's not allowed in Europe and overseas. And that's really eye-opening as far as the preservatives, as far as chemicals, as far as the food they put in the fast food over there, all kinds of stuff. It's really, we could do this in lickety split with a certain administration to outlaw some of these chemicals, and not offer sugary foods to kids and put the things, the little cartoon characters on the boxes, just simple things. And I'm not saying that these big food and big food doesn't need to make money. It's just we got to curtail this problem in some way and have some kind of balance.
Yeah.
Right. And if overseas, a lot of these things are banned, we don't need yellow number 5 in the cereal.
Exactly.
It's made from petroleum. That's just uncool, to say the least. And so it's not that the farm school, they might lose a little money, but it's for the good of the entire world population.
Yep, that's right. I mean, I made a video about this, how many people go to Europe. It's happened to me before. I would say mainland more than the UK, because UK sadly is going rapidly the same way as the US, although it's probably more trustworthy food than here. But mainland Europe, you go to France or Italy, Southern Europe, the quality of the food is amazing. And they're clearly not using the same pesticides. Processed food is much rarer. And yes, a lot of the compounds which are put in food in the US, as you've said, dyes, other preservatives, emulsifiers are banned over there. They're not allowed. And it's a tragedy again. Hundreds of millions of Americans are consuming this, assuming that it's safe. I mean, this morning, I went to get some gas in my car and went into the store to get some water. And I saw some Lunchables. Have you seen those?
Yeah, of course.
Horrible. And kids everywhere are consuming these. And the list of ingredients is as long as my arm. They're packed with dyes, other things. I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, surely it shouldn't be a controversial thing. It should be bipartisan to say that, why would you want to harm your children? I mean, it is such a basic instinct to want your children to thrive. And we've completely lost that. And we're producing an entire generation now that is sicker than any generation throughout history. And it's worrisome for a number of reasons. Not only are they going to be sick, but they need to have children. How is the species going to continue?
Yeah.
I hope we're not too late. I hope we can rescue this situation.
Yeah. And I think that from what you're doing, the incredible work you're doing, and Dr. Ken Berry, all these people online, carnivore doctors, vegan doctors, everybody is speaking out. Like I said, I don't align with the vegan doctors as far as eating meat or not eating meat, but they all talk about don't eat processed food.
Yeah.
So what's really hopeful, what's really hopeful, Suneel, is that people are waking up, and they're saying, hey, if I'm eating my carnivore diet, my arthritis went away, this went away. I'm eating a vegan diet, my heart disease is bad, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really positive thing to be optimistic about, that people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And everybody, unless you're living under a rock, knows that processed food is probably not the best thing to be eating. And so I think that's the hopeful thing, is that the message is all over YouTube, all over everything. Even when the media says this or that. There was that article the other day about maybe, did you see that article? Ultra processed food may not be as bad as you think. People flipped out and they had to change it.
Yep.
Which that was really hopeful.
Worse than smoking. It is. Well, remember, smoking, it took a long time, because partly the medical establishment refused to recognize it because they were also being paid off. They were just as corrupted then in some ways as now. And I mean, the truth always comes out in the end. I would argue that processed foods are far worse than smoking, because when people smoked, it took decades for problems to develop. When did smoking ever give a teenager lung cancer or heart disease?
Yeah.
It hardly ever happened. But processed foods are giving teenagers fatty liver disease and diabetes. So by that logic, processed foods and sugars are far worse than smoking.
Smoking, yeah. And I think I read something about on it was a video, I read it. There was a question someone asked, which is worse, smoking 5 cigarettes in a day or something like that, or eating like a tablespoon of vegetable oil?
Mm.
And the person, that was the vegetable oil, and or seed oils, because avocado oil and olive oil are actual fruits that are pressed. A seed can't be pressed without solvents and different chemicals and this and that. And people, the seed oils is a big problem. It's huge.
It is, yeah. I mean, again, often highly processed and marketed as vegetable oils to make people think they're made of vegetables. But they're horrible. They're a hallmark as well of processed foods.
Yeah, they're hallmark of processed foods. And I write about it in my book. People watch a video on how seed oils are made, they might not want to eat seed oils again, because it's pretty telling, and what it does in your cells. And we allude to about processed food, about mitochondria function. The mitochondria, what that does for people, our friends listening, that's the powerhouse of the cell. That's what makes energy. The main thing, the main part of the cell that makes energy. If you damage that through oxidative stress, through the food, and there's millions of papers on this, how do you expect your mitochondria to efficiently make energy for you? And it's not. I mean, that's just the simple facts of that. And the seed oils are incorporated into cells, into the membranes, and they're oxidized. When they're and what people understand is seed oils oxidize. So if you have, let's do a real quick analogy. If you have a piece of fish and it sits out, the fish will turn rancid, and start to smell, because the polyunsaturated fats are oxidizing. Well, when they break open the seed, what happens is it starts to oxidize instantly.
Yep.
And there's vitamin E and antioxidants in the seed to help prevent the oxidation. That's why when you're eating, grains, you have the antioxidants of the E and the different things to help with the seed, being opened up and turning oxidated from the oxygen. You don't get that when you get the seed oils. And so they're oxidizing instantly. Then they process them. Then they put them in fryers, and the heat makes them oxidize worse. So it's just all these things, and I think the good news is, and as we finish up, that people are starting to understand these things, Suneel, as opposed to 20 years ago. Yeah.
We're getting more
of a slow process.
A political movement now.
Yes.
Finally. I mean, that's obviously happening, one party more than the other right now. But these things are becoming more of an issue. I mean, even if you Google processed foods, you'll see tons of articles now. Google obesity crisis. People are talking more and more, but I fear it might have gone past the point of no return, because it's so difficult to get back. And now with the whole mantra of, we can inject our way out of this. I mean, it's estimated that if you gave everybody who needed it one of those weight loss injections, it would be more than the entire budget of the country. How can anybody think that is the solution?
It's unsustainable.
No, it's unsustainable, and it's not getting to the root cause problem. It's a Band-Aid. Anybody who stops it immediately regains weight. So it's great for the drug companies, and you're still going to get all the same metabolic issues. And I've already seen a ton of side effects with that pill, with that injection. It simply doesn't address the main problem.
The root cause.
It would be like in the 1970s telling people that you got an injection to stop some of the effects of smoking, but you can keep on smoking.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah, it is absurd. Yeah.
Well, I'm hopeful it hasn't gone past the point of no return, because there's a lot of kids and young people, millennials, generation, talking about this. And
I hope so.
I'm 55, so it's not happening in my lifetime that this is going over the rails, but it will in their lifetime. So I think these people are waking up and going, wait a second, this is our world. And Alex, I don't know. We gotta be hopeful. Suneel, that's all we can do.
We have to, because the country's future depends. I mean, I'm a naturalized citizen. I love this country. I want it to succeed. But I honestly, Ben, can see this bringing the country down very quickly, because you can't have 70% of the population obese and afflicted with disease. The country will literally fail. It will become a failed state. And then other countries which put more effort into health are simply going to overtake. That's the natural order of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like I said, all we can do is hope. And by doing what we're doing today on this podcast, what you do every day, through your hard work, dedication, talking about this, and everyone else, it's just one person at a time that changes. And there's a couple people on YouTube, I don't mention their names, but they have just all these stories of people being helped by better diets, and I've done this and that, right? Yeah. So
it's transformative. You just have to push the motivation button. And I've worked with people who are a completely different person in 4 weeks, and I'm sure you have too. It's remarkable when
then they tell their friends.
Yeah,
they tell their family that. So this is this grassroots movement that that's going to hopefully change things around, because it's all we can do.
Exactly.
It's all we can do. Well, you know what? I want to thank you very much for your time, Suneel. It's been a pleasure. I learned a lot from you. Let people know, how can they find out about you, learn more about you? Here's your ad, whatever you want to say.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, you can find me online. I've got a big YouTube channel. You can also go to my website, drsuneeldhand.com. You can find more about the work I do, my health programs. Currently, my flagship program is helping people who are very busy and have lost control of their health, getting them back to a better state very quickly, reclaiming their health, physical and mental. So you can check that out. And other offerings of mine, some of my books, which you've already mentioned, my free downloads as well, all on my website, drsuneeldhand.com. Do check it out.
Once again, thank you so much. And once again, to our listeners, thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Please tell your friends about these podcasts, because on my podcast, we take deep dives into different things that are really impacting our society as a whole, and the people need to listen to this stuff. Thank you again, Dr.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.